Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Red Hat and Stoner Group Ansible Linux Automation Workshop. We're going to go ahead and start for today. This workshop is an introduction to the Ansible for Red Hat Enterprise Linux Automation for system administrators and operators. My name is Renee Briggs with Stoner Group, and I'll be your host for today's event. A little bit about Stoner Group. We're a Red Hat Premier partner specializing in DevOps transformation. We work with companies of all sizes to implement best practices using Red Hat solutions. We have 80 plus consultants in 5 countries with over 500,000 hours of experience, with a focus on automation through Ansible, app migration through OpenShift, and data center management through Satellite 6 and Smart Management. Just a few housekeeping items. During the lab, we will ask that all participants send questions through the chat. You can find this at the bottom of the screen where it says more. Our instructors will address your questions as soon as they're able. For those interested, we are recording today's event and we'll be sending out links to all participants to access the event recording and the presentation materials. Also, before we end today's session, we'll be providing a survey within Zoom. So if you could stick around for that, your participation would be greatly appreciated. At this time, I'd like to introduce our panel speakers. First up, we have Aaron Ferguson with Stoner Group. Aaron is a solutions architect for Stoner Group with over 25 years in information technology experience, leading IT operations to ensure the success of big picture objectives. We also have Chris Hindeman. Chris is a solutions architect at Red Hat. While previously working in network security roles, his focus at Red Hat is on the broader product portfolio, enabling partners on the capabilities and benefits of Red Hat solutions. Chris has led sessions for Red Hat Partner Tech Day, product-specific workshops, and open demos. Also joining us is Mike McDonough. Mike is a senior Red Hat architect with Stoner Group and is responsible for designing and blueprinting OpenShift and Ansible architectures for Fortune 500 customers, spanning a broad array of Red Hat technologies. With over 25 years in experience, or with over 25 years in enterprise IT, Mike has deep experience in cloud architecture, automation, performance tuning, and information security. So thank you to our team of panel speakers and support for facilitating this workshop. Let's go ahead and get started. Aaron, I will pass the session over to you. Aaron, are you there?
I'm here. Sorry, I just had a little microphone issue there. And let me share my screen. All right. Just a couple of quick things here. I'm going to talk about Ansible real quick and then let you guys get to the labs, which I know what you're all here for. So just a couple of things on what we'll be going over today when we turn this over to Mike in the labs. We're going to look at an overview of cloud provisioning, converting shell commands into Ansible commands, retrieving information from hosts, deploying applications at scale, self-service IT via surveys, and overview of systems and roles for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And then at the end, we have a bonus section of, it's an overview of Red Hat Insights integration. And then again, we're going to discover what Ansible can do for you and what the Ansible automation platform is. Automation happens when there's frustration around repetitive tasks. Think about your day-to-day activities. Are there any things that are repetitive in your environment? If you think about it, I bet there are. Organizations have a problem. Automation is already happening in one form or another. Different organizations in the company may be using different tools that are not shareable or collaborative. Ansible breaks down those silos by being vendor agnostic and playing well with all types of environments and has reusable automation across teams with governance and control. Then we start talking about why Ansible automation platform. It has powerful orchestration abilities and can cover all of the IT infrastructure. It can act as the glue tying everything together with all the tools that you have. It's simple because it uses a very easy YAML language and does not require extensive coding skills. You automate everything the same way, implement the platform faster, and use it everywhere in your organization. And Ansible is agentless. There is no client. You end up with seamless integration that works out of the box. Ansible is not just for configuration management. Everything you see here is a possibility and then some. Stoner Group works with a lot of customers that use Ansible for software deployments, OS provisioning and deprovisioning, as well as compliance and governance, just to name a few. Ansible is how Red Hat does automation by unifying automation into a single strategy. Content creators work with domain experts to write playbooks. Operators manage the content and administer the platform. And users consume that content through self-service automation catalogs that help them automate their day-to-day activities. Ansible automates the technologies that you already use. Here you can see some of the technologies in the certified content collections. There are also uncertified collections in the Ansible Galaxy. Red Hat has a very robust partner ecosystem building around this automation language and are always supporting the adoption and traction of the new vertical industries. At that point, I am going to turn this over to Mike and let you all get started on the labs.
Hey, good day, everyone. This is Mike McDonough, Senior Consultant and Architect with Stone Door Group. Just a second to share my screen.
All right. So welcome, everyone. Today, we've got 6 exercises. There's actually a 7th chapter or section in this course. There's 6, though, that have hands-on labs that we'll do during this workshop time. There's a 7th. We'll talk about the topic, and there is a lab that you can do offline, kind of after the workshop or at the tail end of it if there's time remaining. Our goal, though, is to get through these 6 exercises listed here: lab setup, Ansible basics, playbooks using variables, surveys, and Linux system roles. The workshop today is going to be split approximately evenly between lecture and lab. The goal is to give you hands-on lab time, and the goal is for each of you to complete the labs. There's a lab environment that you'll have access to. Each of you will have your own VMs and instances of the applications, Ansible automation platform to use. So you'll each be in your own sandbox, let's call it. It can all be done via a web browser. So it's actually a really cool lab setup, very easy to use. And we'll a little bit later on, in a few minutes, we'll get to the specifics of how you access it. We'll send you post the URLs in the meeting chat, and once we start the hands-on part of the course. So without further ado, let's look at exercise 1, Introduction to Ansible and Verifying our Lab Access. So first of all, we want to talk on a high level, how does Ansible fit into the automation lifecycle? And this slide here attempts to tell us a bit about that. We've got a number of different roles in the left: content creators and domain experts, and we have a number of different kind of levels we can look at automation from. One, we can look at it from actually there's the Ansible content experience. We can also look at the content that's available out there on the web and via your Red Hat subscription. And then, the specific content domains, this is kind of technology specific. And the takeaway here is that with Ansible, certainly domain experts can be involved in Ansible. They can, and this can go either way, really. One, domain experts can create their own automation. Domain experts don't have to be Ansible experts to use Ansible. And content creators, they can do a lot without being domain experts, right? They're certainly depending on the project. You may have run into either situation, but in projects that we work, a lot of times, we have domain experts, maybe a network person that is, starting to do automation, right? They're not an automation expert, but they use Ansible to automate their day-to-day tasks with maybe their network switches or firewalls or whatever have you. On the other hand, content creators, people that really specialize in the Ansible side of things, take on projects that are, do require some domain expertise. Maybe they'll get the input from domain experts, study up on the subject, that sort of thing. With Ansible, you can approach it from either direction. So what does Ansible look like? First of all, this is an example of a playbook, and we're going to go through this in detail over the next few slides and modules. And you're going to be writing your own playbooks. This is an example to give you a picture of what a playbook looks like. It is, first of all, a file in YAML syntax. YAML is yet another markup language. It's a text-based format, fairly easy to use. The thing that you'll learn today is that YAML is sensitive to spacing and basically indentation. The indentation here makes a difference. If you miss a space, this is space indented, not tabs. So you have to indent with the minimum number of spaces so that when the YAML is processed, it is the correct structure that you intended is outputted. So that's important. Indentation matters. Spacing matters, that kind of thing, but it's very human readable. The good news is you don't have to know C, you don't know Java. or C+ or C# or whatever have you. You don't have to be a programmer to use Ansible. Really, all you have to do is learn a bit about YAML and how to make a YAML file that passes the processing step. So what makes up an Ansible playbook? Playbooks made up of contains at least one play. Playbooks can contain multiple plays, and you'll see that in real world scenarios where you have a playbook that contains 2, 3, 5 or more plays within it. Plays can use modules, and modules can use plugins, and we'll explore each of these components as we move along. So a play answers the question, what am I automating? At a high level, it's that, what's the work that needs to be done? In a play is, top level specification. There are some options that will commonly set at the play level. And get some examples on the right. There are certainly more that you'll run across as you develop Ansible content, but some of the basics are: one, a play needs a name, so the name gives basically the name of the play. What host? This is a very important value to set in the play. What host to operate against in this case, and we'll look at how to do this as we go forward. But web in this case is a group, so it's a group of hosts designated by the group name web. It can be one host, host name. And we'll look at how we define these hosts, where these names come from, which is the inventory, which we'll look at and you'll build out and experiment with as we move on. You can also use the keyword all, so all hosts define an inventory. That's pretty common as well. So different things with the hosts, very important. In this case, there's some other options that you may or may not use in the play. Become is setting privilege escalation. On Linux, do you want to become a sudo to root, basically, to run the playbook? And there's other again, top level specifications, options, values that we can pass, set at the play level. That's very common. So what are modules? So modules are really do the work. Modules are you can think of it as tools in the toolbox. And there's many modules out there nowadays. There's 100, I would say, I haven't counted them, but certainly thousands is not an exaggeration. Between the ones that are included in the Ansible core distribution and modules that come along with content collections, there are a lot of different tools in the toolbox. Each of these modules takes various options. In this case, it's a module called template, and they're using a couple options: source and destination. So the template module processes files and takes a template .j2 file, a Jinja file in the Jinja templating syntax, and processes and outputs a file to somewhere where we designate, in this case, var www/html. These modules themselves can be written in a number of different languages, commonly Python for Linux and PowerShell for Windows, but really could be any language. But those are the most common. The good news is that most Ansible coders never have to code a module, right? There are tools, and we leverage these tools. We don't have to build the tools themselves. And that's really one of the most powerful pieces about Ansible are these modules, and that you can do a lot with them and never have to actually write any Python or PowerShell code. And again, I would say that for the most part, that's fairly uncommon, not unheard of to write some Python every once in a while for advanced use cases. If you have something that just is not the capability of an existing module, you can write your own, but certainly not required for day-to-day use of Ansible and automating a lot of use cases. Plugins. So plugins are kind of there are additional tools above and beyond modules. The distinction here is tools can be used within your playbooks, within your Ansible code, and they're a different type of tool, let's call it. And we'll see some examples that make a little more sense. But in this case, what they have on the screen here, they're using some filter plugins one called ToNice JSON, the other one ToNice YAML. So the example here being is that in our playbook, there's cases where we need to take data from variables, modify it, parse it, change it, extract something from it, and then pass that variable as an argument into a module to actually execute. And this is where plugins, these filter plugins come in. There's other types of plugins, but the most common use is the filter plugin type. And again, we can take a value, modify it, and then use that value somewhere else, whether it's outputting to the screen or the log files, or you passing it as an argument to another module or to a module. So I mentioned that we have to define. We talked about hosts a moment ago. So inventory, the way Ansible defines hosts to operate against is via what Ansible calls the inventory. Inventories can be in YAML or JSON syntax. or they can be stored in Ansible Automation Platform, which is stored in its database. But either way, you can think that they are parsed into eventually to a JSON format, one way or the other, into a JSON structure. In this course, though, we're going to be using what's called the INI format. And I said YAML. You can do it actually JSON, YAML, or INI, any of those formats. So we're going to be doing the INI format, which is the example here. And in this example, we've got 3 groups: web, DB, and switches. The web group has 2 hosts: web server 1, web server 2. DB has 1, DB server 1, and switches 2 hosts within that. So in our play, we could use the all keyword to operate against all 5 hosts, or we could say hosts : switches, for example, and then that would pick up lead 0, 1, and 0, 2 if we wanted to run a playbook against our network switches, for example. Roles are another piece of the kind of Ansible component of Ansible that we'll be taking a look at. They're very powerful. Roles is kind of basically allows us to, so we have tools which are reusable, right, written in Python or PowerShell typically. Roles is another way for us to have reusable pieces of functionality. Roles leverage modules that leverage what we call a task. A task is a specific invocation of a module that we'll see. So we can take these, take our task files, which is basically Ansible code. We can take variables, package those all together in a role, and then reuse that role multiple times in our playbooks. We can share that role. Again, think of it like instead of just a single tool, it's a collection of tools that are with some configuration wrapped around it as well, like what the tools should actually do, at what we call a task level. And again, we are able to reuse these roles. So for example, we might have a role for our Linux servers called common, which sets, basic Linux configuration, or RHEL, Ubuntu, whatever have you, values, sets the host name, sets the sudoers file, whatever kind of common Linux admin task. And we can reuse that role. In this case, we're installing and starting Apache, but we might also use it on our database servers and our app servers or whatever have you. So collections, and if we look at this, gives us a list of what is in a collection. So a collection is similar to a role, but kind of in concept at least, but can contain roles can leverage again tasks, and call modules, contain variables, predefined default values, that sort of thing. Collections are a level above that. Collection maybe can contain a role or multiple roles. They can also contain modules, playbooks, plugins, documents, README files, tests, that sort of thing, right? So these collections were introduced a number of years ago in Ansible as a way of packaging up content, and you'll see that the Red Hat Automation Hub really is focused on collections. So there's a collection for example, Microsoft has a collection for Azure. Cisco has a collection for iOS. Each of these collections contains specific modules, playbooks, roles, plugins for that particular technology. And we can download those collections. We can leverage them in our playbooks and take advantage of those additional capabilities provided within the collection. So this gives us shows us the directory structure of a collection and what's in it. This is an example. It varies. In this case, it contains a playbook deployed in Nginx, a README file. There's roles. It looks like there's 3 roles: Nginx app protect, and Nginx config. So 3 different roles we can call. But the collection by itself doesn't do anything. It's just it's basically automation content that we can reuse. So to actually leverage a collection, we would first add the collection, reference it. There's a couple different ways how we can pull it into our Ansible content. And then we'd have a playbook that references, that might call, for example, the Nginx app protect role within our playbook. So this is really kind of the value add of Red Hat, of Ansible, and specifically the Ansible Red Hat subscriptions, providing the these collections on a certified basis. So there's a large number of vendors there. I mean, really, all the major infrastructure vendors: AWS, Google, Microsoft, IBM, et cetera. Network security or network device manufacturers, storage providers, for NetApp, for example. And what Red Hat provides is that each of these vendors has one or more collections, and Red Hat takes these collections and puts them through a certification process. There's also collections out there that are beyond these major vendors that are out there just open source out on the internet and whatnot. the advantage of using a certified platform from a vendor, of course, is that you have some trust in what's in that content. If you just download a collection from a random, GitHub page, your mileage may vary. So that's a lot of the value adds, especially in a corporate type or government type scenario. You can't need to be able to trust your code, know where it came from, what's in it, that sort of thing. And that's
Hey, Mike.
Yes, sir.
You mind if I jump in real quick?
Certainly. Go ahead.
I will paste a link to the Ansible Automation Platform certified content page on Red Hat. I'll paste it in the chat. Just go through it, look for your specific technologies. But I don't want to take away from Mike's lab time here. So I would say keep the link, save it for later, and look at it when you get a chance.
Thank you, Aaron. So how does Ansible automation work? There's a couple of different modes of execution that we need to be familiar with. One's called local execution and the other is called remote. So the most the most common scenario is remote execution. And in this mode of execution, we have a playbook that sits on our Ansible controller machine. That playbook, those YAML files, one or more YAML files, is going to be parsed, turned into JSON, and then parsed and then turned eventually into Python code. Typically, if you're talking about a Linux server, it could be PowerShell for a Windows, for operating against Windows devices. That Python or PowerShell code is then copied over to the remote server or system, and then that Python or PowerShell code is executed on that remote system. All right, so we have local creation of the actual Python or PowerShell code to be executed, and this is the step where it takes the YAML, which is not programming, right? It's YAML, it's text-based. We saw that it doesn't contain a bunch of Python code directly, but what Ansible does is takes the YAML file and pulls in all the Python code necessary to execute the steps that you've defined in your playbook. Right? It pulls in the Python or PowerShell code from the modules that you referenced, for example, puts all that together, puts it in I would not compressed, but it's a Python file. It's not pretty, right? All the space is taken out, but it's pushed over there. It's still a text file at that point, pushed over the remote server and then executed. The other way is local execution. This is typically used for network devices, cloud providers, things with an API. We can't, if we're, for example, automating AWS has an API, but we really doesn't. AWS does not allow us to execute code on their servers, right? So we have to use the API. So when we use those AWS modules for Ansible, the way they're designed to work is that it takes our YAML, converts it to Python, and then executes that Python on that controller node itself, which then makes API calls out to that cloud endpoint. That's similar strategies used for network devices. We can't run Python or PowerShell on a network switch, those sort of devices typically, at least. So instead, the Ansible code is, or the Python or PowerShell is created and executed locally, and then API calls, or in the case of network devices, logins, SSH, the network switch, there's different access methods that can be utilized. So our lab environment, let's talk about it. So the lab environment is actually pretty cool setup, I think, and I'm not just saying that as a sales pitch. I think it's actually a really cool, usable lab setup. I've got some links to it in a moment, but it is a virtual environment that that leverages, that's built using Ansible. We've done ahead of time. We requested a lab environment, and the lab environment creates, there's a self-registration page that you're going to use to sign up, and it's going to give you access to an Ansible control node, as well as Ansible automation platform, and again, sandbox. So you're not going to be sharing anything with each student has their own environment, and it can all be accessed via a web browser. So lab access, we've got a couple of the Workbench launch pages, which I'll put in the chat in just a moment. Let's see here. What you're going to do is just go to this page here. Let me go ahead and do this while I'm get sidetracked.
Mike, we only really need the first one right now.
Yep. So that's the important one. And the second one you may want as well. You'll need this one as well, actually. So the first one is where you sign up for the labs. You'll put in your name and email address, and then the next page will look like, look like this. Once you sign in, you're going to get a page that looks like this. We're going to be using the VS Code Access and Automation Controller. These are the two URLs that and again, I'm student 1, you'll be student 2, 20, or whatever have you. We won't be using the Automation Hub today. I'm using the first 2. Passwords are here, and username and password for Automation Controller. So what you want to do is go to the first link, sign up, and then you want to click on the VS Code access. It's going to open up Visual Studio Code in a web browser. It asks for a couple questions. Once I answer the questions, first thing I do is go open folder. And I go ahead and just select the student, home student, select OK. And there we have access to the left-hand side. Here's all the files in the student's home directory, including here's the actual modules that we're going to be looking on or working on today, including the, if you'd like, you can read the lab instructions here. Let's see here. Why did it not put? For some reason, well, you can get a preview here, or there's a way to look up the controller. You can also preview the markdown here as well. The important bit, though, is to then go open new terminal, and we can do our work here. So, oops, I'm in the home student directory. There's the files. And this is actually how we're going to be doing the hands-on part of the command line part of the lab is through the terminal in VS Code. So let's take a look at the actual lab exercises. Give me just a second. If I can write, oops, too many tabs. So this is the lab, and they are available. The second link, actually, before we look at this, the second link will take you to this page. Make sure we're apples to apples here. This page. This is the exercises, and if you go to exercise 1, this is where we're at right now. And some of these are links back up, so you have to. They're a little. You go back up.
Mike, real quick, this is Chris Heineman from Red Hat. If you go back to the workshop tab right there, I'm sorry, the next one over.
The next one over.
Yeah, so at the top, there's Ansible RHEL exercises and then the technical deck. If you access the link through there, you're not going to have the redirect issue.
Yeah, and that's what I'll be using. Thank you, Chris. That's what the version I'll be using and showing here. That's what I've got. It's a little easier to follow than the other one, right? So go to exercise 1. If you want to see the source code, though, it is available on GitHub. Oops, over here. It is available on GitHub, and RHEL 90. And this is all there. So it's useful sometimes to look through here. One thing I did want to mention, the reason I have this tab open, there are other workshops available out there. You can go through these yourself. There's instructor-led ones. So you might want to go github.com, Ansible workshops. There's other ways of using Ansible. We're going to be working on this one, though. Ansible Red Hat Enterprise Linux Workshop is what we're looking at today. All right. So exercise 1, lab environment. Again, there's first is accessing the environment. Go to the first link we sent, ending in example.opentlc.com. Put in your username or your name and email address, and you'll end up with a page that looks like this. Open the Visual Studio Code. That's what we need for these labs. Later on, we're using Automation Controller, but Visual Studio Code is where we're going to start. Once you're in Visual Studio Code, go File, Open Folder. And again, I like opening there's the student folder like that. And then open up a terminal. You go terminal, new terminal. And this way you can look at actually some of the files. For example, you can look at things up here. There we go. I'm not sure why it's not previewing like it's supposed to. Usually it previews and not working today. But what you can do still is there's some parts in here where you can copy paste. So if I go like that, Control C, if you come down here now, if you right click and click paste, you need to do that allow, and then you can right click and paste. So that's goal number 1. Make sure everyone has access to Visual Studio Code, access to the command line. Then you need to please follow the rest of the instructions. There's using the terminal and actually in a self-directed pace. Again, each of you go ahead and run these commands. Take a look around, start becoming familiar. Ansible Navigator is the tool that we're going to be using for most of the command line parts of the lab. So you'll run Ansible-Navigator, take a look around at how that works. to give you a brief preview, this is actually Ansible Navigator here. The way it works is you see on the left-hand side, there's a number, 0, so it's like 0. And then let's say I want to look at the Python packages, select 3. I just type number 3 in. So there is one trick to it. If you want, it's not entirely obvious. If you want to select something above 9, put a colon in, and then, for example, 12. That takes me to 12. To go back, press escape, and you can do escape, and it on the main page, it will, here it'll quit. So Ansible images, 0, 4, let's say this time. In a second, and let's say we want to look at crypto policies, so :19, and now you can if it's more than one page, you can go up using your arrow keys, page up and page down. All right, so take a look at that. We're going to look at the versions and collections. Also want to look at the Ansible Navigator configuration file, which will be in your home directory here. All right, so everyone, let's go ahead and get started on that. If you have any problems, please post up in the meeting chat, and we'll give you 10 minutes for this lab. So about 13 after, we will restart. Yeah, good point about the home directory path. It is, the correct path is home student rel_90-workshop. Sure. There's a couple of different versions of this lab, so or this workshop. Here we go. All right. Hope everyone was able to finish up the lab. There's a question about the Azure collection. So there are extra collections available. Again, hundreds of them, if not more. They need to be added to the install, so you won't see them on the lab systems. You would need to run this command here. To add it to the install. There's other ways to do it in your Git repo, holding your Ansible playbooks, or actually in your Ansible playbook structure, your folder structure. You can tell it to add a certain collection. Actually, and AAP, for example, will download that collection for you if you've got the configuration set up. The name of the collection, though, is AZ collection. It's technically the name of it. And to give everyone an idea, we come back to collections here. Here are from the Red Hat certified collections. And there's 137 of them currently. Here's some examples: Red Hat, IBM, Dell. But you can search here, and Cisco, for example. Cisco has 10 collections. So that's workshop number 1. Let's go back to our lab exercise here. So exercise 2, we'll look at Ansible inventories, accessing the documentation, which is very helpful. Because the Ansible modules and plugins typically have fairly good documentation. It's certainly a requirement for the certified collections. And also we'll look at modules and how to get help. So inventory. Ansible works against multiple systems in what's referred to as an inventory. And I mentioned there's different formats the inventory can be stored in: INI, YAML, JSON, in the Ansible automation platform itself. For our purposes, though, it'll be file-based, and we'll be using the INI format. Inventories can be as simple as a single host, or it can have multiple hosts, multiple groups, and we can also assign variables to these groups or at the group or host level to help determine how Ansible behaves when it operates against those hosts. And we'll see that here in a couple slides. So inventory basics. Here's a very basic inventory with one group called My Servers. It has hosts, most of them listed by IP address, and then one listed with a host name. You can use host names or IP addresses. There are ways, by the way, if these names are not resolvable. Let's say you have host ABC, and we can also add a variable to that host to actually give it tell Ansible what IP address to connect to or what host name to use. So there are different ways, but by default, Ansible interprets this as the IP address or host name to connect to directly. We can override that behavior. And here's an example of that at the very top. Group app1 SRV has app server 01 and 02 in it. And in this case, we're telling Ansible, okay, when you connect to app server 02, connect to host 10.42.0.3. So in this case, maybe app server 02 does not doesn't resolve on the controller system, for example. So other shortcuts we can use and things to look at here in this example. The second one here, we can use this syntax with our square brackets and basically starting and ending sequence, and Ansible will fill that out. So we'll actually end up with 30 nodes in this group, node 1 through node -30. And then you can see on the right-hand side, the IP address is the same way. The IP addresses will be 31, the last octet 31 through 60. So that's a nice way if you have hosts that repeat in a pattern like that, so you don't have to type them all out. We can also assign variables to groups. In this case, we're assigning 2 vars to the web group, Apache listen port and Apache root path. We can also assign variables to there's always a group called all, whether you could add a group explicitly and have it in your inventory file. But most of the times it's not explicit, instead of an implicit group. So Ansible automatically creates the all group consisting of all the hosts that are in your inventory. And in this case, we're assigning 2 variables to all those hosts, Ansible user and Ansible SSH private key file. Again, kind of just what we talked about there. So let's look at another kind of a little more advanced use case with inventories, and that is nested groups, which is a very useful feature. So we can nest groups. And in this case, we have 2 groups, one called Nashville and one called Atlanta. And we create a third group called South, which consists of the groups Atlanta and Nashville, plus in this case, they've added a host, 2 groups and a host to this child group. And you can see that the syntax is group name : children, and it'll show the children. We can have, that could go, we could have another group that contains the South group, which would then incorporate these 2 groups, Atlanta and Nashville, plus the host. So you can have nested groups. And that's a strategy that you'll want to look at as far as organizing your inventory files. So accessing the documentation, so one, of course, you can Google it, and the Ansible website has a lot of information. This is all available in multiple places, but the good news is you don't have to go. You can fire up a web browser. We can just use this Ansible Navigator with the doc sub command. So I copy that and come back over. Oops, wrong tab. Come back over here. Paste. Yes, I want to paste. Didn't do exactly what I wanted. There we go. So this is going to pull up the documentation, and I'm sure that didn't work. So we'll see that in a minute in a working example. Let's see here. Oh. There we go. That's what I meant. Add host to the first line of output. And we'll take a look at, you'll actually use the exercise that command during the labs. So we have this Ansible Navigator doc command, and we can then drill down and pick up, actually read the documentation for example, AWS Caller Info module, which is contained in the Amazon.aws collection. We can also look at all the built-in functions. In this case, using Ansible Navigator doc subcommand for user, and that M standard out. We'll look at that. Basically, we can Ansible Navigator. We can either use the terminal user interface, the TUI, which is what we looked at in the previous lab, or a lot of times we don't want it in a full TUI interface, that we just want it output to the screen. So we can add this additional option -M standard out, so we can just read it in real time there on the screen without actually firing up the full TUI. So we do that. Paste. And there's our documentation for the user module. Manages users. In this case, it's for Windows targets or Linux, actually. Some modules are specific to one or the other. Other modules will operate against both Windows and Linux devices. Those are options that we can use. You can see there's a lot of them, and examples for how to actually use the module in a task. All right, so Bash versus Ansible. We'll just take a quick look at this, just kind of for comparison's sake. This is, example of how would we do things in Ansible versus doing things in Bash. In Ansible, we're going to have a module in what's called a task. The task will be within a play, and we're going to use appropriate modules. For example, in this case, this is a command module, which actually just runs a particular Linux command, in this case, MS SQL -conf command -n setup, except EULA, and passing in a couple of variables. And the second example here, we're actually using the line in module to make sure there's a line export path equals path, et cetera, there in the file. So just showing an example of how you might do things in Bash versus Ansible. Ansible has loops, so there's a couple different ways to do loops. It's actually using the loop option, and it's telling to loop through two files, bash profile and bash RC, and execute the line in module against each of those files. All right, so let's take a look at exercise 2. Come back over to our lab instructions. And if you go down to the bottom there, click next exercise. So basics, or excuse me, objectives for lab 2. One, we want to work with inventory files. We want to locate and understand the INI formatted inventory file format. It's really crucial that you be able to manipulate, set up the inventory file for your use case, for your environment. And we also want to look at modules and how to get help with those modules. So let's go ahead and start on this exercise. I think this one's fairly straightforward. Should be able to just kind of walk through it, take a look at it, to explore. I do encourage you to, once you completed the basic exercises, you have time left, try some of the, look at some of the other options, and take a look a bit deeper if you have time. So we'll give you about 10 minutes. We'll restart at about 33 after the hour. As far as questions, I think we're getting those answered in chat. I don't think there's an automated way to convert Bash to Ansible that I've seen, at least. Bash being an open-ended programming language, that'd be a fairly tall order. Typically that's done via, whoever's doing the Ansible coding, analyzing the Bash and converting it, right? Converting the functions. And there was a question about format syntax for Apache variables and all that sort of thing. First thing to start is with the documentation on the module itself. So if we look at, let's just pick a module here, a collection, and then within the collection, pick a module. So let's say we are using the iOS banner. The place to start as far as what's available is to look at the module documentation. It will list the parameters that can be passed to each module, along with examples. So in this case, this module only selects or accepts 4 parameters: banner, multi-line delimiter, state, and text. And it gives you examples, what the choices are, comments, that kind of thing. So that's where to start for documentation. Other questions? Mandatory to include fully qualified domain name and IP? The answer is no. Really, as long as the Ansible controller is able to connect to the target host, whether that be via host name, IP address, short name, fully qualified domain name, doesn't really matter to Ansible as long as that resolution works. If you give it a name, it's got to be able to resolve the name. If not, you can use the Ansible host variable parameter to set, for example, the IP address, as in the example in the slide we looked at. And then Ansible upgrades. So Ansible, the command line tool, I would say, so there's a difference between, upgrading Ansible on a controller node might be just as simple as, running yum update or DNF update, that kind of thing. Ansible automation platform, there is more to the upgrade process using the full AAP platform. Got to download the new version, run setup.sh using your the inventory file for the install, and there's a setup.sh uses Ansible to upgrade the platform components. There are some changes as you go from different Ansible versions, from 2.9, for example, up to we're on Red Hat 2.12 is the current version, that's in use. I would say the most common version. There are some differences at an Ansible code, Ansible level between the two. In general, backwards compatible, but there are some things. They changed some of the collection, module or naming path requirements. In older versions of Ansible, you were using the short names for the modules. Was acceptable in 2.12 release. You use the fully qualified path names for roles and modules. There's some other things. You certainly want to test your code, but it's a straightforward process, just updating packages.
Yeah, and Mike, just to expand upon that, this is Chris Heineman from Red Hat. So yeah, I mean, I think the biggest difference in upgrades with what's been going on recently is the difference between AAP and AAP2, which introduced the separation of the control plane from the execution plane, made use of containerized execution environments. So that's something that we see a lot of people upgrading to AAP2 to take advantage of those EEs. Which are essentially container images that provide a standard way to build and distribute the automation environment that the automation runs in. So that's one of the biggest things I think you see people upgrading for.
And just actually to that point, Ansible Navigator versus using the old Ansible playbook, the legacy Ansible playbook command. So the old versions of the commands are still available. You don't have to use Ansible Navigator. The real advantage with Ansible Navigator is that it is able to use execution environments, which it does by default. You can override that behavior, tell it not to, but by default, it's going to use an execution environment. So if you're developing Ansible code, especially it's going to run on AAP, which AAP uses execution environments, using Ansible Navigator, the command line allows one to run playbooks with the same execution environment that you use in your AAP environment. And of course, there's other reasons for the other advantages of execution environments. Provides kind of basically allows you to have all the dependencies for your playbooks in one place that's static and not have to worry about traditional Ansible before execution environments. People would add collections, and maybe someone would add a newer collection or a different version. There'd be version incompatibility, or maybe you give a playbook to somebody and it wouldn't run because they didn't have the dependencies. Now you can give them a playbook and an execution environment and be sure that it will run as you intended. So the question about Ansible Navigator effectively replaces Ansible Playbook. They are Ansible Navigator can run all the playbooks that the Ansible Playbook command. The difference really is Ansible Playbook does not use execution environments. Ansible Navigator will use by default an execution environment. So there's some differences in the behavior between the two. But you can run playbooks with each, and you can also tell Ansible Navigator not to use an execution environment. I believe that's the correct statement. An execution environment is a container image. So we say execution environment. So it is a container image, and specifically execution or specific type of container image. I mean, they're generic. There are standard container images run by Podman. I guess you could run them with Docker if you wanted to. The distinction in terminology is an execution environment is built. There's some commands that are included to build execution environments. Again, they're kind of containers specifically for running Ansible. And you can when you build the execution environment, you can customize what collections, what version of Ansible is included, what version of Python, what system packages are included, and what collections are included, that sort of thing, when you build the execution environment. When you run it, then your playbook runs in the container, which is created from the execution environment image. All right, let's take a look at exercise 3. So in exercise 3, we're actually going to be building some playbooks and running a playbook. So this is really like hands-on Ansible. This is where rubber meets the road in exercise 3. So let's look at the anatomy of a play in more detail. So a play you see here, this is similar to the example we saw in the first exercise, but we're going to break it apart and look at the components in more detail. So the top here, we have defines the name of the play, what host to operate against, in this case, a group called web. We're also telling it to use privilege escalation to become root. And then the play consists of 3 tasks. Notice they're in a section called tasks. These tasks then in turn call modules, yum, template, and service. And to each of those, a couple of options or variables or values are being passed to influence the behavior of each of those modules. Here's a task. Again, this is a task called HTTP packages present, calling the yum module. In this case, which package? It's going to be HTTPD, and the state we want is latest. You also want, for example, this would upgrade, or if the package is not installed, it would install it. If it's behind it, if it's down revved, If there's a newer version available, it would upgrade it using the Yum module. The name tasks, good practice is always to name your tasks like this. It's not technically necessary though. You can actually leave out this name value. You could just have, dash space Yum, and then have the rest of this. You'll see that, especially like debug, for using the debug module, just output some debug statement. You don't necessarily need to, there's times where it's just repetitive to name some tasks. So you'll see that left out. Some of the kind of back end or the, supporting tasks, but it's definitely best practice to name your tasks. It helps with troubleshooting. There's a module, Yum. Now, when we execute a playbook using execute a playbook, there's some color coding that's used, which makes things helpful. Green, yellow, and red. Green and yellow. Yellow doesn't really mean caution, by the way. The green and red are both okay, as it operated as expected. The difference is green is that Ansible checked, found that the state of the target system already matched whatever was defined in the task. Therefore, the task completed successfully, but no actual change had to be made because the end target already was in the correct state. Yellow means that the task completed successfully and a change was made. So it was able to connect to the remote system, run the module. The module found that a change did need to be made, and that change was made successfully, or at least per the, however the module is configured. You'll get used to both of those. Red is there's an actual failure in task execution by default. Those sort of failures, if it happened in the middle of a play or before the end, that's going to cause the play to stop, and you'll see an error and have to go fix it, maybe rerun the play. One of the important concepts between Ansible is idempotency, which is basically let's look up the textbook definition. But in practice, it means the ability of, or the characteristic of the Ansible is we can re-execute the same automation, the same over and over again without, and whether it's the first time, the second time, or the 100th time, the state of the target system will be the same. Now, what's the opposite of that? Well, the opposite might be, for example, you have a task that adds a line to a file. Well, if that module and Ansible code is idempotent, that means that we can run that over and over again, and we're only going to end up with one copy of the line in the file. If it's not idempotent, if you're running 100 times, you end up with 100 copies of the same line in the file added over and over again. So it's important. Most modules in Ansible support idempotency. However, it does take some work on part of the Ansible developer to make sure that the tasks are actually idempotent. Line in file is a good example. Line in file, if you use the right options and configuration, pass the right values, it will be idempotent. However, it's certainly possible to use line in file and end up with adding a new line every time, even though you only really wanted one. So it's an important thing to watch out for. Not key to today's exercises, though. So playbook run. What does it look like? Here's an example from kind of small text, but we'll see this as we get into AAP. This is actually from Ansible Automation Platform. There's similar output when we run it. If we use the old playbook style output or use Ansible playbook command, this is what it looks like at the command line with Ansible playbook. Ansible Navigator gives us similar information, but in a different format by default. We'll see that in just a second. So using Ansible Navigator runs subcommand of the name of the playbook. Again, that's replacing Ansible playbook. What does it look like? We'll see that in just a second. So Ansible Navigator, we were talking about, there's a command line interface and a text-based interface or a TUI. If you don't want the TUI, add -m std out to the end. That's handy. Again, TUI is good for browsing around. There's times where you just don't need it, and you just want the output at the command line. Mapping old commands to new commands. You see a lot of these are very Ansible Navigator, and then the subcommand maps directly over. So Ansible -inventories, Ansible Navigator space inventory. I think the exception playbook becomes Ansible Navigator space run, but the rest of them are very similar to the legacy commands, just as a subcommand instead. Here's a more full table showing all the Ansible Navigator subcommands and also how you can access these. If we've in the TUI, you can type in : inventory, for example. If you're already in the Navigator UI. let's take a look at our exercise. Oops, that's the wrong button. Go forwards, not backwards. So writing your first playbook. Objectives, we want to understand and passing parameters to modules. We want to use three specific modules, yum, service, and copy. And we want to understand idempotency or idempotence and how Ansible modules can be idempotent. It's always a mouthful, but again, very important concept in Ansible. And one of the keys, again, that if you take a little extra care in writing your playbook, thinking through, hey, what's going to happen if I need to run this playbook twice? It will save you, and typically your playbook will be more not reliable, but robust, I guess is the better word for it. And I've seen examples of this in real world customer projects. We have a customer I work with is VM provisioning, after the VM's provision, all the configuration, installing backup agents and stuff like that's all done with Ansible. And some of the Ansible code was written by a bunch of contractors over the past year and a half. Some of it's really good. Others, if you run it twice, it blows up, right? And so they only ever thought about it running once. Never thought about that. Hey, this could run twice. And so now we're having to go fix it. So playbook basics, YAML files, typically you put 3 dashes in the first line, not actually required. Your YAML will still work without 3 dashes, but nice to have, especially if you use an Ansible lint command, it will complain about that, not being proper YAML format if you use a linter. You must use proper indentation. Use spaces, not tabs. Your playbook's not going to work if you get the indentation wrong or if you use tabs, right? Let's see. Ordering of contents is important. Ansible plays execute basically top to bottom. There are ways to include, there's kind of where we can branch out, do things and come back to the playbook. But at a high level, it's top to bottom. So the tasks are going to be executed in the order in which they're listed. Again, there's ways to include other content and more and effectively branch out. But at the end of the day, top bottom, that's what you need to keep in mind. In this case, we're going to step number 2, we're going to create a subdirectory, and then you're going to actually create some YAML. You can type this out or you can copy paste it into your terminal session. As far as terminal editors, if you come back over here, do this. I like VI personally. But you can also use, if you don't like VI, you can use Nano and use all the control keys here, how to write files out, how to exit down at the bottom if you're not familiar with VI. Keep that in mind. And so let's go ahead and I'll give you about 13 minutes for this exercise. So what's that put us at? About 5 till we'll restart. So Ansible Navigator, 2.12 in the Red Hat world, at least. Ansible Navigator may have been 2.11, but in the Red Hat world, it was really became GA with Ansible 2.12. 2.9 does not have Ansible Navigator. That was the previous GA version of Ansible you'd see commonly. Yet 2.9 does not have Ansible Navigator. So package.yaml or YML, you're going to create that file. It's got a new file that you will need to create. All right, let's take a look at the next chapter. The labs, by the way, I'll try to give you more time for each of the labs as we go forward. They get more complex. All right, so I'll try to give you a little bit more time for each of these. Let's go ahead and take a look at exercise 4, variables and facts. Very important part of Ansible coding is learning how to work with variables and how facts fit into the overall landscape and functionality with variables. So variables, there's many different ways to define a variable in Ansible. Here's one of the most kind of simplest ways to do that. That is to use a vars section and at the playbook level. In this case, the playbook is setting 3 variables, var 1, 2, and 3. And you can see here, we can actually, var 3 is actually equal to the value of var 2 and var 1. So if we look at this, the task, we're actually using the debug module to print out var 3. And what's that going to look like? Ansible is awesome, right? var 3 is equal to var 2. Ansible is space var 1. Awesome. So Ansible is awesome. And you'll see this is very common in Ansible to need to do this sort of thing, to take value 1 plus value 2, assign it to a new variable, variable 3, whether in this case space delimited or any kind of syntax used to create the a new value that you can use again in a new variable and maybe a new a separate task or follow-on task. So facts. So variables are, before we leave that overall topic, variables are very similar to variables in any other language. Value equals parameter, or parameter equals value, excuse me. The things to note about Ansible is that they are not scoped. So variables are basically have a global scope. It's not unlike other languages where variables may be, unique to a function, or private to a function, that sort of thing. No concept like that in Ansible. They're all global in scope. There is a precedence depending on where the value is. So if you define the same variable name multiple times, that can be done. There's a precedence, a set precedence of which value is actually going to be used. The list is on the documentation for the Ansible website. There's a list of, I don't know, a couple dozen different ways that variables can be defined, and again, the precedence for how they'll be used. So facts are really just like variables, and in fact, in reality, you can think of them as really equivalent. I mean, from a usability or usage standpoint, they are equivalent. It's really a matter of how they get created that is where the difference lies. So facts are, parameter equals value again. Facts are the difference is that they're typically created by what's called the setup module, and there's a module called setup. The setup is run by default when you run a playbook against a host. Setup by default, unless you turn it off, it runs by default and gathers a large number of what we call facts, which are basically parameter value key pairs about the particular host you're operating against. And you'll see that if you actually look at that output, that variables can be just simple values. They can also be lists or dictionaries, or basically kind of equivalent of hashes and in other languages, or arrays, that kind of thing, right? So we call them lists or dictionaries in Ansible speak. So you'll see more complex data structures when we look at the actual some facts that are created from the Linux or Windows server. But conceptually, again, very similar and to a variable we looked at a couple slides ago. Then they could be that simple as well, just parameter name and a simple string or number as a value. When we run the setup module, so it's run by default, but we can also explicitly we can disable that behavior and then run it only when we need to. There's various options for setup. In this case, they're doing the all option, which is basically just like running setup, but you can use this gather subset to narrow down what facts are collected. This can be done to, if we look here, this can be done before we move on to help speed up execution. If you don't need information about a host, why gather it in the first place, especially if you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of target systems, saving a couple seconds here and there does add up. So you can make your playbooks more efficient by only gathering the facts that are actually needed for that particular play that you're running. In this case, they give an example of running Ansible Navigator run and then playbook.yaml. It's a very simple playbook, gathering facts, running setup to gather facts and gathering all facts. Shows you what it looks like when it runs. When you use Ansible Navigator without the standard out option. We could use our keyboard again, 0, we can select 0, select the playbook. Then we can select, it shows the tasks that are within that particular play, and we can then click 1 to actually zoom in on that particular task. So managing variables and files. So vars can be defined at the playbook level, the vars option that you saw there. We can also set these variables in files. And there's a couple different ways to do this. One, Ansible has a defined directory structure. So when we run our playbook, it looks for certain subdirectories under that playbook. And based on those specific set names, group_vars and host_vars, it will interpret YAML files in each of those subdirectories as var files, and it'll automatically read them in. The host files under host vars are host vars. There's apply to one host. Group vars, on the other hand, apply to groups. And the naming here, the file name does matter. So group vars, web.yaml applies to a group called web. Host vars, it applies to a host called node, in this case, node 2. You can also do subdirectories under each of those. So there's different ways to organize the vars files. And the advantage of doing this is that you can maintain separate variable definitions for different hosts, different groups of hosts, and not have to put all that, not have to have separate playbooks. Right? If I run the playbook against the web group, then it'll automatically use the value of web.yaml as it's executing. Maybe we had another group called Apache, right? Or maybe an example, MySQL, right? We could have another file, MySQL.yaml, and we have a separate set of vars that are then applied to hosts in the MySQL group. So good way to manage your vars file variables and assign them to specific groups and specific hosts without overloading the playbook. Or the playbook, there's not really a way to do that kind of mapping of specific group to variables. You could do it, I guess, in the inventory file, but that would get pretty clunky to do if you have a lot of variables. So it's much better to bring those out. You can also have certain files that are read in using in the playbook explicitly, and you can tell Ansible to read in a vars file explicitly with the file name, tell the file name, and Ansible will then read that particular variable, the contents of that YAML file in as variables. So if we look at this, let's see here, we got examples on the right-hand side. The contents of group vars for the web group, stage is dev. For node 2, stage is prod. So if I run this against systems in the web group, the value of stage will be dev. If I run against node 2, on the other hand, it will be prod. And you can see that the source file here would be different. They've got a dev underscore web and a prod underscore web. So when this runs, based on the host that it's working against, it will insert the value of stage and pick out the appropriate file name shown on the left. So let's take a look at our exercises now. Things are getting a bit more interesting on the Ansible side. This lab is actually a bit longer as well, so I'll give you more time for this one. Objective, how to use variable delimiters. So you really need to understand how to use variables, how to set them, how to use host vars and group vars, how to use Ansible facts, and then using the debug module to print them. It's very handy when you're troubleshooting and you're developing Ansible code. Sometimes you don't know if it's a var name set by setup, for example. You got to find it, right? Using debug is helpful, or maybe it's a variable that you've created, and maybe done some changes to the data. The whole var1, var2, and var3 example. Var3 is equal to var1 plus var2. It's helpful to be able to see what is that var actually equal to, right? Maybe it's not you think it's equal to ABC, but it's actually equal to ABD or ABCD or something like that, right? So being able to debug and print that output using debug to print the value of those variables is very helpful when troubleshooting your Ansible code. Creating variable files. So it's going to walk you through creating these two specific host vars and group vars directories, populating those, creating your input files. This is going to be the prod web and dev web. Create a playbook to use those and execute it, and then verify the results. And then also going to take a deeper dive into the setup output. And here they should showing filtering. In this case, we're running setup, gathering all the facts, but only bringing in a couple of some facts that Ansible underscore ETH0 or anything that's Ansible underscore wildcard underscore MB. It's pulling those values in. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I gave you 15 minutes. This one will restart at 20 after the hour. All right, so let's take a look at exercise 5. So 5, we're going to switch gears and we're going to actually start using Ansible Automation Platform. And to make sure that we can all access that, here's the link. Go ahead and open that new tab. Username is admin. Grab the password. Actually, I've already got it saved here. Log in. This is Ansible Automation Platform. And in this module, we're going to be looking at surveys. To give you a little context, though, what does a survey look like? This is actually a survey. And a survey here, this one consists of 5 different survey questions, a text, and multiple choice options. The survey, if you say, okay, what is a survey? What does it even look like? If we launch this template, this is what a survey looks like from a UI perspective, right? So it has a text field, node 1. configure the firewall. In this case, multiple yes, no is the way it's been set up. So let's configure the firewall, configure time. Let's not harden SSH and not apply the PCI baseline. So this is just an example. So we go back to what a survey looks like from a user perspective. Surveys are also very useful for integrating Ansible with other systems like ServiceNow, really kind of any upstream system. It could be anything we can execute a REST call, because these values can also be passed in via the REST call to launch the job template. So that's actually probably, in addition to interactive use, if you have users that need to do things, launch jobs from Ansible using the AEP Web UI, they'll get this. But it's also very common to use surveys for integration with other systems that are going to call the Ansible job templates and launch them and pass in parameters for these particular survey questions. So we go back to our slides here. That's kind of our big picture context. What is a survey? A survey allows us to configure how a job runs via a series of questions. Makes it simple to customize your jobs and provide a user-friendly interface to them. Question and answer form type format. Again, there's multiple different choices in terms of the type of data entry. You can do text, multiple choice, multiple choice, single choice, that kind of number of different options in terms of the type, how the questions are presented to the user or external systems, of course. We can set default values. It can be a mandatory or not mandatory. There's lots of flexibility in how surveys behave. So creating a survey, the context here is we come back to Ansible Automation Platform, and the slide doesn't do a great job providing context. What they're really talking about doing is going into a job template. Notice the left-hand side, I'm under Resources Templates. So let's start at the beginning. Resources Templates, select the template, and go to the right here, go Surveys, and then click, by default, there won't be anything here. I'm going to click the Add button, and I can say, my question, I can answer this is going to be assigned to a variable called myvar. It's going to be text required and basically a free form text up to 1,024 characters long. Click the Save button, and that's going to save it. We now have a question, my question. Now, by default, when you create a new, if you haven't used surveys before with the template, the survey will be disabled. This will be grayed out. To enable it, go ahead and click that to make it blue. If you don't do that, the survey will not actually be used when the template is run. I'll go ahead and delete that because I don't need it. So if we come back to our slides here, creating a survey, they're clicking the Add button. Again, this is under Templates, Surveys, Template Survey, Add Survey button. If you didn't fill in the questions, and in the lab, you'll be doing this in the lab. They'll give you specific values to use for the name, the var names, that sort of thing. Make sure to follow that as per the lab. Make sure to click the On button. It's actually over here. The UI is a little bit different in the latest version of AEP. The button's over to the right here. So we go back. Notice it's survey enabled is there. Make sure that's blue or enabled. Then using a survey during the lab, you'll launch the job. To launch a job, we come back to AAP here. Come back to our templates. We can do it with the rocket ship button. We'll launch the job template and actually start the survey. So there's a couple things we need to do though to make this lab work. Very important. If you don't do this, the lab instructions will not work correctly. The first, and that is we need to add a project. A project allows AAP basically as a pointer to a source code repository. And in this case, we need to add a project of Git type. So we come back over here, go to projects, do this before you start the lab, click add. And you want to set the source code type to Git. That'll allow us to fill in our URL. Come back over here, just to make sure everything lines up with the lab instructions. Let's call it workshop project. So name workshop project, you leave these the defaults. Let's select Git as the source control type, copy and paste the URL, and click. I would say you can also check this button, not absolutely required, but that'll make sure that the repo is synced. And if we now go back to projects, workshop project, you'll want to make sure this shows successful. If this shows an error, we need to fix it before you go on to the lab. Okay, that would indicate probably that you have a typo in the URL be the most common reason for this not working. So I'm going to copy and paste these directions into the group chat so everyone can see them. Again, make sure to follow those directions and create that project before you start on the actual lab. So let's take a look at the lab exercise itself. Objectives here, we're really going to learn how to use surveys and actually use those surveys to run running a playbook. You're going to extend on the previous lab, so hopefully you've done that. These labs do build on each other, so you will need to have you completed the previous lab automation content, and we're going to configure a role, Apache configuration role. Again, create a project. Oh, I actually added the updated. I found a bug against this, so they actually did update this to, yeah. So that's actually in the instructions. So good deal. Revved the documentation. Then we're going to create a template with the survey, and we're actually going to create a new template. We're going to come back here to templates and click the add button, add job template, and then follow follow the directions here. Make sure to use these values, okay, so that things line up. Copy paste that into the new template form. Then you're going to add a survey, enable that survey, and then launch it. All right, give you about 13 minutes for this one. So let's say 40 after we'll restart. All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's take a look at exercise 6 and look specifically at Red Hat Enterprise Linux system roles. So this exercise has a couple of different goals behind it. One is to actually look at some of the roles that are available specifically for Red Hat Enterprise Linux from Red Hat, but also to look at really how to utilize roles in a more generic sense with Ansible. So Automation Hub and Ansible Galaxy are both locations where you can download roles and collections. The differences between the two: Automation Hub is from Red Hat. It's a subscription service, includes certified content. Ansible Galaxy is an open source community website, lots of additional content on Galaxy, but your mileage may vary in terms of the quality of that Ansible code. Certainly something in a corporate environment you would want to analyze and read through. The good news with Ansible and Python, as well as PowerShell, is all those are human readable, right? You're not dealing with obfuscated binaries or that sort of thing that you'd have to, it would be hard to analyze. Both are good options out there, certainly with, if you have a Red Hat subscription, go ahead and use the collections from Automation Hub before you use those from Ansible Galaxy. System roles collection. So Red Hat has provided a number of collections, and if we go back to Automation Hub, go to partners, there's one of the Red Hat. Let's go collections. So we have collections here, and if we come down, we should see, here's our RHEL system roles collection. And within that collection, if we click on contents, we can see the contents. There's 30 roles, 22 modules, and a filter. So we look at the modules, and you'll be using these in the upcoming exercise, managing firewalls, kernel settings, mount points, SE Linux, network connections, lots of good stuff there. And then there's roles as well. You can leverage these roles as well to configure networking, NTP, postfix, etc. Lots of good stuff available from Red Hat. There's just some examples there. So using one of these roles, or how do we use a role within a playbook? Well, a couple different ways to do that. In the include role module, it allows us to include a role in the playbook. There's also an import _ role module that you can use. I typically use include. There's a little bit difference in the behavior, they're not exactly the same. Personally, I end up using include a lot more than the import. I think import was kind of more the original way of doing it. Historically, at least for my purposes, the playbooks I've written, I typically use include. It tends to be just work better for me in terms of the kind of the nuances and how they work. So we use include role, and then we name the role that we want to include. Notice that we do need to include the fully qualified name of that role, which in this case is vendor collection name and then role name. and then more of the, if you just wanted to use, there's another collection of Linux system roles here, using the firewall role out of that collection. So Errata, let me see if they've incorporated that. Let's take a look at our exercise. Next. All right, so goal of this exercise is actually leverage the system roles and the RHEL system roles, right? There's some differences there in terms of what's official, just Red Hat official versus things that are more just from the general open source side of things. We want to make sure our Ansible project is there. And I think, let's see, Ansible project, those credentials that we need. So we should have a project, official demo project, come over to AAP. Let's look at our projects, make sure that's there. Yeah, Ansible official demo project is there, so we're good. Then we want to examine the playbook, open the repository. This is actually look at the repository. There's a hardening.yaml file that we want to take a look at. Look at the tasks, examine the system roles. We want to launch that job template. Now there is a piece, let's look at security hardening. Look at our templates and security hardening. And the part that the errata is for, if we click edit, yeah, so we do need to do this step. I don't believe this is called for, actually called out, I haven't fixed this in the lab verbiage. Let me copy and paste this into chat so everyone has it. So we want to, before you launch the security hardening job template, we need to add a credential. So we go to the template, open it, click edit, go to credentials, click the hourglass button. It'll be set to machine by default. Just select workshop credential, click select, and click save. There we go. So credential, it should say SSH workshop credential. If you don't do this, the playbook will not run correctly. So make sure to do that before launching the job template. All right, and look, job template, go ahead and make sure there are instructions about how to answer these questions, by the way, pay attention. It's like no, no, yes, yes, no, no, I believe per the instructions here. And then verify the configuration that it actually did what it's supposed to do. All right, so go ahead and again, go ahead and work on exercise, work on this exercise. Where we have exercise 6, lost track there. And we'll give you about 14 minutes for that. So what is that, 56, top of the hour. We'll restart. All right, let's take a look at exercise 7. 7, there's some slides here. There is a lab, I believe, that you can run through. Let's check the latest, let me check the latest version of the lab instructions. There's actually not a lab in this version. So we'll just look at the slides. All right, so exercise 7 or module 7 is about Red Hat Insights and the Insights service and Insights integration. If you're not familiar with Insights, Insights is a hosted SaaS type offering. And if we come back here, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Red Hat Insights. So this is a SaaS offering. It's included, depending on your subscription levels with Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's included in a lot of the a lot of subscriptions that are sold commonly, though not all of them, but certainly it's something that you could add for a reasonable price to your subscription. Red Hat Insights provides a lot of information, and we'll look at what it provides here in the next few slides. So Red Hat Insights helps you better manage hybrid and cloud environments. It works with no matter where your RHEL servers are located. It also integrates with other platforms, like directly with Ansible Automation Platform. So not only can it give you information at a RHEL level about your servers, but it can also give you information, really useful information about Ansible Automation Platform as well. What does Insights do? Gathers information. It gathers, analyzes, and generates recommendations, and also for OpenShift. I failed to mention earlier, but OpenShift, and that integration actually is very useful as well. It can warn you, for example, if there's a particular security vulnerability for your OpenShift cluster, if it needs to be upgraded, that sort of thing. So lots of good stuff from Red Hat Insight integration. What does it help you with? Make sure your configuration are up to date. I think one of the most useful features provides a centralized view of all the CVEs impacting your systems, patches, compliance risks, allows you to actually look at things like subscriptions, and allows you to take action. It's not just a reporting tool. You can actually take action from Red Hat Insights to run Ansible playbooks, for example, against your host to correct the issues that are found. So here's some examples of what Red Hat Insights looks like. Again, this is the default dashboard. I don't have any systems tied into this account at the moment, so it's not particularly interesting, but you get an idea of vulnerabilities, advisor recommendations, risks, remediations, resource optimizations. It is picking up. I do have a Red Hat OpenShift cluster. If we look here, that's actually tied into this Insights instance. Here's our OpenShift container platform. Again, as you drill down, and again, recommendations at the cluster level. So we're focused, of course, on Ansible today, not so much OpenShift. For Ansible, it provides some features and benefits kind of above and beyond what AAP itself provides. As far as out of the box, the on-premise or wherever you're running, whether it be on-premise, on the cloud, wherever have you. It provides some additional reporting that's going to be very useful, especially things around monetization of automation, how much labor or money your organization saving, which automation, even if you're not concerned about money savings per se, but things like, which automations are run most frequently, that sort of thing. So it gives you a lot of good information about, how the Ansible automation platform is being used in your environment. It's got a savings planner, so you can put in some stats, and it'll spit out a number if you're trying to do ROI on a particular project. Hey, it's going to cost $20,000 in labor to develop particular automation. How long is it going to take for that $20,000 to be made back? Those sort of things. And in the business world, being able to actually put numbers on your automation and demonstrate the cost or labor avoidance, cost savings, that sort of thing out of automation. It's a strong driver for getting your business to approve those Ansible subscriptions in the first place, give you more money for and time to devote to automation development, that sort of thing. Savings planner statistics, obviously you got to punch in you got to punch in good numbers to get good numbers out of it, but this gives you an idea of what it might look like. In this case, it's a pretty big savings, almost $1.7 million, so good for them. Automation calculator, determine ROI on your investment. You can also look at which templates you can break it down. This is kind of, instead of forecasting out, this is looking at actual statistics of what templates are being run, the number, and by assigning, a dollar value per that, manual costs, automated process costs, that sort of thing. You can calculate a total savings, in this case, about $2.2 million. We can also look at the health of our organization, or health of our automation content, I should say, at an organizational level. Organizations are a construct in AAP that allows us to group our automation content, maybe by department or team, that sort of thing. In this case, though, we're looking at how automation is being run, which workflows, which templates, which modules, so you can really see what automation, not just what automation is developed and sitting there, but what's actually being used, and get a visualization of that. There's Red Hat Insights has an advisor functionality, availability, performance, stability, security, that sort of thing. This is an example, advisor recommendations. And I may have some of those to give you an idea. Clusters, show you a bit about what that looks like. Just look at one here. Our description, advisor recommendations. There's an issue here. This would look similar for AAP. This happens to be OpenShift, but in this case, it gives us a warning about some data being lost, and gives you some steps to resolve. It will give you similar feedback for Ansible itself, and you can see here, or for RHEL servers, Ansible Tower is out of scope for Ansible Sport, Postgres database. So some good information there, again, about not just about what security CVEs impact your environment, but kind of more general recommendations about how to improve the availability and stability of your environment. It's also capable, the tool Insights is capable of detecting drift against a baseline from other systems, historical system profiles, or a baseline you defined. So it's a useful feature. And I think that something that, people ask about a lot is, how can I tell what's, how can I tell what's different in my environment, what's changed? And Insights help you with that comparison. In this case, you can see you've got a couple of Amazon EC2 instances, physical server, another Amazon instance, and gives you a comparison, allows you to compare and contrast. Policies, if we look at the policy functionality, we can set up policies, and then Insights will report against the trigger and report against those policies. In this case, they've set a if a fact enabled services contains Ansible Tower, send a notification. Okay, yeah, there's Ansible Towers on this TWR33 demo redhat.com system. Reports. I think this is again one of the more useful functions of Insights is reporting on changes made by your job templates, the run rate, tracking KPIs, changes made by job templates, so you can actually see which templates have been run, how many hosts were changed by those templates, how many the task level information as well. So again, it helps you provide data to your business and your IT leadership on how Ansible is actually being used in your environment. So the last slide here has links to learning more. Again, a lot of this information and training is available, open source on the web. You can go through download the PDFs of the presentations, go through this at your own pace. In addition, the lab environments themselves, the ones we're using today, will be available for about another 24 hours. So you're welcome to hang out with us today and this afternoon and continue to finish up your labs if you're still working on those. They'll also again be available for about 24 hours, till tomorrow afternoon or so. Renee, do you have any, or Aaron, do you want to have any closing comments?
Yes, actually, we will be releasing, or I'll be releasing a poll at this moment to collect feedback. Second.
Yeah, we really would appreciate your feedback and answering the questions. It really helps us out, helps us tailor the content and improve upon it. So really would appreciate everyone filling that survey out. Also thank you very much for your time this afternoon. If you've got any questions, I'll stay around and please post them in chat and we'll try to answer those. All right, thank you very much, everyone, on behalf of Stone Door Group and Red Hat. Thank you, and again, we'll keep the session open and keep chat open if there's any questions.